They say loyalty is rewarded in the end, but mine nearly buried me alive. I'm Evelina Hartley, born in 1951 in Hobart, Tasmania. Back in 2022, I discovered that my daughter-in-law had rewritten my husband's dying wishes and erased me from everything he built. I felt discarded like old furniture, but then something happened. Today, at 74, sitting in the house I was once pushed out of, I'm finally sharing this because silence lets evil win. If you're listening, drop your city below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear this. When my husband Patrick died, I thought the deepest pain I'd ever feel was the moment I kissed his forehead goodbye in the hospital. We'd been married 42 years. He had been my youth, my partner in building our family foundation, and the one person who never made me feel invisible. At least, not until his final breath. It was only weeks after his death that I discovered grief wasn't my biggest enemy. Betrayal was. The will reading was held in Sydney, in a cold, modern office with sharp glass walls and a view that made me feel like I was drowning above ground. I wore Patrick's favorite blue shawl, the one he always said brought out my eyes. The room was packed with our son Leo, his wife Annalise, extended family, board members from our charity, even some journalists who'd somehow sniffed the scent of $52 million in legacy money. I was quiet, heart still raw, fingers trembling as I clutched the envelope I thought contained our life's work. That was when Annalise stood up. High heels, hair pinned like a crown, theatrical tears. I was cut out of my husband's $52 million estate, she declared with perfect timing, just before the lawyer could begin. The whole room stiffened. My mouth opened, but no sound came. Then the lawyer, an older man named Felix Rowe, who'd known Patrick since the early 80s, actually chuckled. At first, a stifled snort. Then a full, uncontrollable laugh. "I'm sorry," he said, wiping tears from the corners of his eyes. "But Mrs. Hartley, that's not what this document says at all." He read the will. It was brief, dry, shocking. Everything, every cent, every share in the family charity, even the holiday cottage in Freycinet was left to Annalise. Not even Leo. And certainly not me. No acknowledgement of my decades at Patrick's side. No mention of the foundation I co-founded. I felt the ground shift beneath me. People stared, some awkwardly, some with judgment. I tried to smile, to keep my dignity intact. But inside, I was unraveling. That laugh from Felix, intended for Annalise, was the only thing that kept me from breaking. Because it told me something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my little rental flat like a ghost. I made tea I never drank. My grief turned to suspicion. Patrick would never cut me out. He was a proud man, but he wasn't cruel. And he certainly wasn't stupid. Annalise was clever, yes, and persuasive. But she was also hungry for control, and I knew she'd been whispering in his ear in those final weeks. I just didn't know how deep it went. The first clue came from an old notebook I found while sorting through boxes Patrick had left behind in storage. Scribbled on the margins of a page were these words: "Don't let Annalise talk me into anything. Lydia said I should get a second opinion. Ask Hal." It wasn't a full sentence, but it was enough. I remembered Lydia Velasquez, a fiery probate lawyer Patrick had consulted briefly 2 years before he died, when we were updating our joint trust. And Hal Givens, the tax consultant who'd helped us restructure our charitable assets in 2019. I reached out to both. Hal responded first. He said Patrick had scheduled a follow-up in April, a week before he died, to finalize changes that would have added me back into the will after a brief, confusing removal during a health scare. But the appointment was mysteriously canceled. By Annalise. Lydia was next. She didn't remember specifics, but offered to meet me. "Bring whatever you have," she said. "Paper trails don't lie." I also confided in Daniel Curran, Patrick's oldest friend, who had distanced himself from the foundation after Annalise took over more operations. Daniel was cautious, but agreed to help me investigate quietly. Together, we poured through digital archives, pulled witness logs, and requested court-filed versions of Patrick's will. Something wasn't matching. The dates of the will's notarization didn't align with his hospitalization. The witnesses listed a nurse named Marie and a man named Brandon I didn't recognize had no digital footprint. No employment history in the hospice. Lydia's brow furrowed. "I've seen this before," she said. "Undue influence. Possible fraud." I felt the floor tilt again. Fraud? My daughter-in-law forged a dying man's will? But it made sense. Patrick had grown distant in the last 2 months. Annalise was always around, managing his meds, his meetings, even his calls. I had assumed she was helping. Instead, she had been isolating. I played the long game. I smiled at public events. I showed up at the foundation gala Annalise hosted in June, dressed in navy silk and pearls. People whispered, curious why the founder's widow wasn't on the board anymore. I smiled. I watched. And I waited. That night, I overheard a conversation that sealed everything. "She thinks no one knows," Annalise said to one of her friends, wine glass in hand. "I handled it all before he passed. She's sentimental, not strategic. There's nothing left to contest." But she was wrong. There was one person left to contest it, me. With Lydia's help, we filed a motion to freeze the estate assets. Felix, the lawyer, was subpoenaed. He seemed stunned, but compliant. Then, a miracle walked through the door. Ava Kendall, a former assistant at the hospice. She'd heard whispers about my investigation and came forward on her own. "I saw her," Ava said, her voice trembling. Annalise came in with paperwork. Patrick was asleep. She had someone sign on his behalf. I didn't say anything then. I was scared. But I can't keep this in anymore. That testimony cracked the case wide open. Annalise panicked. Her team accused me of harassment, of bitterness, of clinging to a past that wasn't mine. But the documents didn't lie. Ava's account matched Lydia's timeline. Hal backed up Patrick's concerns about Annalise. And the witness signatures? Forensically proven to be false. Still, it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about my name, my place, my legacy with the man I loved. And I wasn't going to be erased. When the court officially froze the estate's assets, the temperature in Annalise's eyes turned cold and glassy, like someone who knew the walls were finally closing in. But even then, she didn't back down. She doubled down. Press releases flew out painting me as a bitter old woman unable to accept the natural order of succession. Succession? As if my husband's legacy was just some royal throne to be stolen, not built by decades of shared labor, love, and late-night coffee over planning documents. But I didn't react. Not publicly. I let the evidence do all the shouting. Behind closed doors, Daniel, Lydia, and I worked tirelessly. Lydia filed a motion to contest the validity of the submitted will, citing undue influence, fraudulent witnessing, and document tampering. A secondary motion followed, requesting the court acknowledge a 2019 draft will be found in Patrick's private storage folder, a file labeled simply Legacy Final Thoughts. It wasn't signed, but it bore his handwritten notes, initials, and a list of people he wanted to honor, including me. At the bottom of the notes was this: "Whatever happens, make sure Evelina is safe." She built this with me. That note became my backbone. Every day was a legal battlefield. Emails, depositions, cross-examinations. Annalise wore her anger like perfume, expensive, obvious, and trying too hard to distract from the truth. But her shine was cracking. Whispers began surfacing among foundation staff. Leaked voicemails. Expense reports showing early asset liquidation attempts. A private island consultation. She was preparing to cash out before the funeral was even over. A court-appointed investigator took over the foundation's financial logs, and what they found made me sick. Grant money had been redirected. Memorial funds rerouted. She even tried to sell Patrick's rare book collection, his pride and joy, every first edition he'd ever collected, through a third-party auction site. Without board approval. The day she was removed as managing executive, I didn't celebrate. I sat on the steps of the foundation building, wrapped in my husband's old sweater, and cried. Not from sadness, but from the weight lifting, piece by piece. For the first time since he died, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. heard, protected. Even in death, Patrick had reached back through the fog to shield me. But I wasn't done. There was one final move I had to make, not for revenge, but for restoration. With Lydia's help, I requested a formal reinstatement to the foundation board, not as Patrick's widow, but as co-founder. The board voted unanimously. Daniel returned as interim chairman. We didn't go after Annalise for damages, though we could have. The fraud was clear. The theft was prosecutable. But I said no. Let her walk, I told Lydia. I don't want blood on these walls. I want peace in them. Annalise quietly stepped away from public life. She issued a statement filled with half-hearted apologies and vague denials. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The foundation moved forward without her. The programs resumed. The scholarships were unfrozen. The people we served, mothers, widows, and community leaders, reached out in floods. Some sent flowers. Some sent letters. But they all said the same thing. Thank you for fighting. Still, there was one moment I hadn't yet reclaimed: the house. Our family estate on the Gold Coast. The place where Patrick and I had danced barefoot in the kitchen. Where Leo took his first steps. Where we once slept on a mattress on the floor because we hadn't bought a bed yet. That house had gone dark after Annalise's takeover. She hosted fundraisers there, political brunches. Turned our backyard garden into a poolside bar. But after the court revoked her control, the deed reverted to the estate. And the estate had been unfrozen. I walked through the front door on a rainy Friday morning. No one was home. The air was still. I wandered from room to room. Everything had changed, yet the bones of our love remained. Patrick's armchair was still in the corner, though reupholstered. My teacup set was still in the china hutch. And on the bookshelf in his study. The last thing I ever expected to find. A sealed envelope. Yellowed, but untouched. To Evelina, just in case. I sat down. My fingers trembled. Inside was a letter. His handwriting, shaky but unmistakable. My love, if you're reading this, then something went wrong. If I wasn't strong enough to fight her off, know that my heart never betrayed you. I wanted to protect you. If I failed, forgive me. But you must stand up. Reclaim what we built. Our story doesn't end with her. It ends with you. Or better, begins with you. I sobbed. Loud, aching sobs that echoed through those cold walls. That was the final piece. A month later, we held a memorial, a real memorial. Not the press circus Annalise had arranged. This one was held in the community park Patrick loved. We invited no cameras. Just people. Neighbors. Volunteers. Students who'd received scholarships. Elderly women who'd gotten housing help. Every story they shared painted the portrait of the man I knew, the man Annalise tried to erase. Afterward, I stood before them all and shared my truth. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. I simply told the story of a woman who was almost written out of her own life, but chose to write herself back in. And now I write this to you. Because some of you might be where I was, silenced, sidelined, smeared. You may have been pushed out of your own story by people with louder voices or slicker lies. But hear me now, you are not invisible. You are not replaceable. And if they try to bury your name, dig it back out. In ink. In action. In legacy. I still keep Patrick's letter in my bedside drawer. Not because I need proof anymore, but because it reminds me of how far I came. And every morning, I open the window of our old home and breathe in the sea air we once shared. I smile now. Because I didn't just win. I returned. I reclaimed. I restored. And I rewrote the ending on my own terms. Moral lesson: sometimes your silence is mistaken for surrender, but the quietest voices carry the deepest truths. Reclaim your name. Reclaim your story. Rewrite the ending.